One touch, one moment of curiosity, and suddenly I was thrown into chains in her palace. Rules weren't just rules, they were laws enforced with unyielding precision, and I had broken the most sacred one, touching the princess. But the worst was yet to come. The queen's doctors examined me, their verdict confirming my deepest fears. My life and, possibly the fate of others, was now in their hands. This is not a story about surrender. It's a story about how human ingenuity, courage, and moral strength can survive the impossible, even under the watchful eyes of an entire alien monarchy. When the galaxy expects fear, a human proves that wit and resolve are mightier than chains. If you enjoy HFY sci-fi stories, tense alien court dramas, and moments where humanity defies every expectation, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Your support helps bring more unforgettable stories to life. The palace was calm that morning, filled with soft sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and the gentle movement of curtains in the warm air. It was a grand place, but behind its beauty lived many ordinary people who worked quietly every day. Among them was a young man named Aaron. He was not important, not powerful, and not known by many. He worked as a helper in the outer halls, cleaning floors, carrying supplies, and doing small tasks that most people never noticed. He kept his head down, spoke little, and always followed the rules. Aaron had grown up poor. Life had taught him to be careful and respectful, especially around people of high status. He believed that trouble came when someone tried to stand out, so he never did. He arrived early, left late, and avoided attention. The palace guards barely noticed him, and the nobles did not know his name. That was how he wanted it. That day was different. The palace was preparing for a public gathering. Important guests were arriving from nearby regions, and the royal family was expected to appear on the balcony. Servants were rushing everywhere. The halls were crowded, and tension filled the air. Aaron was assigned to help near the garden path that led toward the main steps. His job was simple: make sure the path stayed clear. As the sun rose higher, music began to play. Guards stood in lines, and people whispered with excitement. Then the princess appeared. She walked with grace, dressed in light colors that reflected the sun. People lowered their heads as she passed. Aaron did the same, stepping aside respectfully. He did not look at her face for long. He had been taught that it was safer not to. As the princess moved closer to the steps, something unexpected happened. A loose stone near the edge of the path shifted under her foot. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but enough to cause her balance to slip. In that single moment, time seemed to slow. The princess stumbled forward. Aaron saw it before anyone else. He was close, closer than the guards, closer than the ladies walking behind her. His body moved before his mind could think. He reached out instinctively, grabbing her arm to stop her from falling hard onto the stone steps. For one brief second, the world was silent. The princess did not fall. She steadied herself, her breath sharp with surprise. Aaron released her immediately and stepped back, his heart pounding. His face turned pale as he realized what he had done. Then chaos erupted. Guards shouted. Steel clashed. Voices filled the air with anger and alarm. Before Aaron could say a single word, strong hands grabbed him from behind. He was pushed to the ground, his arms forced behind his back. "How dare you?" someone yelled. Aaron tried to speak, tried to explain, but no one listened. Chains were brought quickly, cold and heavy around his wrists. The crowd watched in shock as he was pulled to his feet. Some people gasped. Others whispered. Fear spread fast, and truth had no time to stand. The princess stood frozen, her hands still slightly raised. Her eyes followed Aaron as he was dragged away. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but her voice did not come. Everything happened too fast. From the balcony, the queen had seen enough. Her face was filled with anger and fear. To her, it looked like a serious violation. Without waiting for questions or explanations, she gave a sharp command. The guards tightened their grip on Aaron and pulled him toward the lower corridors beneath the palace. Aaron's feet dragged across the stone floor. His mind raced. He replayed the moment again and again. He knew he had acted to help, but now it felt like his life had ended in a single second. Fear pressed on his chest like a heavy weight. The halls grew darker as they went deeper underground. The noise of the gathering faded away. Finally, they reached a small stone cell. The door opened with a harsh sound, and Aaron was thrown inside. The door slammed shut. Silence followed. Aaron sat on the cold floor, chains still around his wrists. His breathing was fast and uneven. He stared at the wall, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. That morning, he had been nothing more than a quiet worker. Now, he was treated like a criminal. He wondered if anyone would listen. He wondered if anyone would care. Above him, life in the palace continued. Music resumed. Guests laughed again. But deep below, a man sat alone, trapped by fear, misunderstanding, in a moment that no one had allowed him to explain. And that was only the beginning. Aaron sat alone in the dark cell, the cold chains biting into his wrists, and the chill of the stone floor seeping through his clothes. Every sound from the corridors above made him flinch. Footsteps, whispers, and the distant laughter of the palace guests. It felt as if the entire world had turned against him in a single moment. He tried to remember what he had done wrong, but all he could think of was how he had only tried to save the princess. That simple, instinctive act had now made him a prisoner. Hours passed. Days seemed to blend into one another. Aaron could not see the sun, could not feel the warmth of the world above. The guards brought him only basic food, barely enough to satisfy hunger. They spoke to him harshly, their words cold and accusing. Every question they asked assumed guilt. Every glance seemed to weigh him down further. He tried to explain what had really happened, but no one would listen. Guards had their orders, and the queen's anger left no room for mercy or understanding. Rumors spread quickly throughout the palace. Servants whispered in corners about the man who had dared to touch the princess. Some spoke with fear, others with curiosity. The noble women murmured to each other, imagining the scandal that might come of it. Even the lowest servants, who barely noticed Aaron before, now watched him with suspicion. The palace seemed to have forgotten that he was innocent. To them, he was a criminal in chains. A man whose fate had already been decided. Above all, the queen's anger loomed large. She paced the halls of her private chambers, her face tight with worry and rage. Her daughter's safety was her world, and she could not forgive anyone who might have endangered it. In her mind, Aaron had acted with intention, and intention was enough to make someone dangerous. She refused to consider the possibility that his touch had been accidental, or that it might have even helped the princess. Her love for her child blinded her to reason. Meanwhile, the princess herself felt a storm of emotions.
Ow.
She knew that Aaron had done nothing wrong. She remembered the way he had reached out, quick and careful, saving her from falling. Yet when she tried to speak, the weight of the guards and the palace's expectations held her back. She could not raise her voice against her mother's anger, could not contradict the queen's orders. Fear, confusion, and a sense of helplessness filled her heart. She felt trapped, unable to defend the man who had protected her. Inside the cell, Aaron wrestled with his thoughts. He tried to understand the situation logically, but every attempt ended in frustration. How could the world punish someone for doing the right thing? How could a simple act of kindness turn into a crime? He thought of his family, of the small home he had left behind so many years ago. They would be devastated if they knew what had happened. The thought of their worry added another layer to his pain. The guards who watched him were strict and unyielding. Some of them looked at him with barely concealed suspicion, while others seemed to take a grim satisfaction in their power over him. They questioned him relentlessly, asking why he had touched the princess, what he had intended, and whether he had any accomplices. Every answer he gave, calm and honest, was dismissed. His words fell on deaf ears. The palace had already decided that he was guilty, and no explanation could change that. As days passed, the loneliness weighed heavier than the chains themselves. Aaron had no one to talk to, no one to trust. He tried to keep his mind occupied, replaying the moment of the princess's stumble over and over. Each time, he reminded, himself that he had done what anyone would have done in that situation. He had acted quickly to prevent harm. But even as he repeated this, a creeping doubt began to form. What if the palace never believed him? What if he spent the rest of his life in this dark cell, remembered only as a criminal? Outside the walls of the cell, life in the palace went on without pause. The nobles and guests continued their festivities, unaware or uncaring of the man who had been imprisoned. They moved freely in gardens, dining halls, and grand corridors, while Aaron remained locked away, invisible to the world above. It was a cruel contrast, the beauty, laughter, and light of the palace against the dark, silent suffering of one man. Despite his fear, Aaron refused to give up entirely. He remembered the small lessons his mother had taught him long ago. Stay calm in the face of danger, speak only when necessary, and never lose hope. He repeated these thoughts to himself, a quiet mantra to keep his mind alive. He imagined that one day someone would understand that truth would somehow emerge. That hope was fragile, but it was enough to keep him from despair. The queen, meanwhile, grew more determined with each passing day. She consulted advisors, discussed punishments, and made plans to ensure that such an incident could never happen again. The man in chains became a symbol of fear within the palace, a reminder that even the smallest threat to royal safety must be punished swiftly and without question. No one dared to speak in his defense, not even those who knew the truth. Fear of the queen's wrath was stronger than the desire for justice. The princess, too, carried a secret burden. She could not stop thinking about the man in the cell. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, pale and anxious, hands bound in cold metal. She felt guilty, helpless, and unsure of what to do. Her position as a royal made it impossible to act openly, yet her conscience would not let her forget him. Deep inside, she began to hope that someone would see the truth before it. It's too late. Aaron's days became a mixture of routine and uncertainty. The guards brought him food and water at irregular times. He spent long hours sitting on the stone floor, staring at the shadows cast by the dim torchlight. At night, he listened to the faint sounds of the palace above the laughter, the music, and sometimes the soft steps of the princess herself. Each sound reminded him of the life he had lost and the innocence he had tried to protect. Time moved slowly, stretching each day into an endless trial. Aaron learned to conserve his energy, to speak only when necessary, and to endure the harshness of his confinement. He clung to the hope that truth would prevail, that the princess would speak, or that someone would recognize the mistake. The palace may have condemned him, but he refused to condemn himself, and so, in the dark beneath the grandeur of the palace, Aaron waited. He was alone, misunderstood, and punished for an act of kindness. But inside, a quiet determination grew, a resolve that one day the world would know what really happened, and the injustice he suffered would not be in vain. He had acted without fear for another's safety, and he would not allow chains, fear, or rumor to destroy the truth. The days in the palace passed slowly, but for the princess, something was not right. At first, it was small and unusual tiredness that made her eyelids heavy, a faint dizziness when she walked through the grand halls. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was simply from the excitement of the recent gathering. Yet, with each passing day, her strength seemed to fade further. Tasks that were usually easy for her became exhausting, and even walking across her chambers left her short of breath. The queen noticed the change almost immediately. She was a mother who never let anything go unnoticed when it came to her daughter. Her face tightened with worry, and she called the palace doctors without delay. The physicians were skilled, wise, and known for their knowledge, but even they were puzzled. They checked the princess from head to toe, tested her pulse, examined her eyes, and questioned her about every symptom she could remember. Everything seemed normal at first, yet nothing they tried appeared to make her better. The princess herself became frightened. She had never been so weak, so vulnerable. Sitting in her chambers, she realized that no one could see what she was feeling inside, no one except the doctors, who could only examine her body, not her worries. She began to remember the incident in the garden, the moment when she had almost fallen. Her mind kept returning to the young man who had saved her, the man now chained in the dark cell beneath the palace. A strange thought crossed her mind. Could his touch, the very thing that had brought him punishment, have somehow affected her condition? She quickly pushed the thought away. How could it be possible? The idea seemed too strange, too incredible, yet a small part of her could not stop wondering. As the princess's weakness grew, the palace grew anxious. Courtiers whispered in hushed tones. Guards doubled their vigilance. The queen's fear deepened into near panic. She would not tolerate anything that threatened the life of her daughter. Her anger at the man in chains, which had seemed so absolute before, was now mixed with fear, confusion, and a need for immediate answers. Something is not right, she told herself. And until I know the cause, nothing will bring me peace. The doctors worked tirelessly day and night. They brought in specialists from faraway places, experts in conditions that few people could even name. They examined the princess carefully, consulted with each other, and discussed every possibility. They tested her blood, her pulse, and her breathing. They even looked for rare illnesses, conditions that most people had never heard of. But still, nothing explained why her strength was disappearing. The queen became more frustrated with each passing hour. She demanded that the physicians find a solution, ignoring the limits of science and medicine. Meanwhile, the princess's mind was restless. She could not stop thinking about the events. Of the garden, about the man whose face flashed before her eyes every time she felt faint. She remembered his quick hands, the way he had acted without fear, and the kindness that shone through, even as he was being punished. She began to feel a quiet guilt, a worry that perhaps the man had suffered too much for doing what was right, but she could not speak out. How could she defend someone who had been labeled a criminal in front of the entire palace? How could she oppose her mother's anger, which now mixed with desperate concern for her own life? The situation became more serious one evening. The princess was walking through her chambers when she suddenly collapsed. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to the floor with a soft thud. Servants rushed to her side, panic in their eyes. The queen, hearing the commotion, burst into the room, her face pale with fear. The doctors arrived quickly, examining her with hurried but careful hands. They worked tirelessly to stabilize her, using remedies and treatments that had helped countless others in the past. Yet even as they worked, the princess remained weak, her breathing shallow, her pulse uneven. It was then that one of the senior doctors remembered the incident in the garden. He recalled how, moments before the princess nearly fell, a young man had reached out to steady her. Could there be a connection between that touch and her current condition? The idea was unusual, almost unbelievable, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The doctors began to consider a new possibility, that the man in chains, who had been punished so severely, might have been involved in a way they had never imagined. The queen listened to this suggestion with disbelief. She shook her head, anger still simmering beneath her fear. How could he, a lowly servant, have any effect on the princess's health? She demanded. But the doctors persisted. They explained that sometimes the human body reacts in unexpected ways to external stimuli. A brief touch, they said, could trigger reactions in someone's body that no one could easily explain. It was rare, but not impossible. The queen's face grew tense. The thought that the man she had condemned could now hold the key to saving her daughter's life was almost too much to bear. The palace was in turmoil. Guards and servants alike began to murmur. Some worried about what might happen if the man were brought back. Others feared the queen's anger if they suggested anything that contradicted her previous orders. The princess herself, though weak, pleaded quietly to the doctors. She wanted the truth to come out. She wanted the man who had saved her to be understood and freed. But her voice was soft, barely heard in the chaos surrounding her. After careful testing and observation, the doctors discovered something remarkable. The touch that Aaron had given the princess, far from causing harm, had actually triggered a response in her body that helped stabilize her condition. It was subtle, invisible to the untrained eye, but it was enough to prevent her from falling into a far more dangerous state. The realization stunned everyone. The man they had punished, the chains that had seemed necessary, had been wrong all along. The very action that had been condemned had, in fact, saved her life. The queen's reaction was immediate and complex. Fear, guilt, and shock all battled within her. She had acted in anger to protect her daughter, yet now she realized that her actions had punished an innocent man who had done nothing wrong. Her face turned pale as the weight of this truth settled on her. The princess, though weak, looked at her mother with a quiet understanding. She wanted her mother to see the truth, to understand the courage and kindness of the man who had acted without thought for himself. The palace shifted as the news spread. The story of the princess's illness, combined with the revelation about Aaron's actions, began to change the way people saw the incident. The whispers that had once accused him of wrongdoing now carried hints of admiration and relief. People began to understand that he had acted with bravery and selflessness, even as he suffered in the dark cell beneath the palace. And yet, even with the knowledge that Aaron had saved her, the princess felt the weight of fear and helplessness. She thought of the chains, the darkness, and the loneliness he had endured. She could not stop the tears from coming when she thought of the suffering caused by a misunderstanding. By fear, and by the quick judgment of those in power, her gratitude was mixed with guilt, and her strength was renewed not only by the doctor's care, but by the hope that Aaron might soon be freed. As the doctors confirmed the truth, the queen made her decision. The man in chains must be brought before her. She had been wrong to punish him, wrong to assume guilt without proof, and wrong to let fear guide her actions. The palace guards moved quickly, carefully, and with a sense of unease. The once feared man was now at the center of attention for a very different reason. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter, a moment when the truth would finally confront the power of fear, when the man who had been punished for kindness would stand before the royal family, not as a criminal, but as a quiet hero whose actions had changed the course of events in ways no one had expected. The news of the princess's condition and the surprising discovery by the doctors spread quickly through the palace. Whispers traveled faster than the wind, reaching every corner. The man in chains had not harmed the princess. He had saved her. The guards who had dragged him away so forcefully now looked uneasy. Servants who had gossiped and feared him now felt a mixture of guilt and relief. Even the courtiers who had been ready to condemn him found themselves reconsidering their judgments. The entire palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Aaron sat in his cell, unaware of how much the tide had turned above. The days had blurred together, but even in the darkness, he had never lost hope. He had told himself over and over that the truth would eventually come to light. Yet now, as the guards approached to escort him to the queen, a new emotion filled him: fear. He had been imprisoned for so long, punished for what he had done without thinking, and he did not know how he would be received. Would the queen apologize? Would the princess speak? Or would anger still overshadow everything? The heavy door of the cell opened, letting in a flood of light. Aaron blinked against the sudden brightness, feeling the cold metal chains around his wrists. The guards led him through the stone corridors, past rooms he had never seen, past servants who stared at him with wide eyes. Some looked shocked, others hesitant, as if unsure whether to treat him with respect or contempt. Aaron kept his head down, his heart beating rapidly, trying to stay calm. Every step brought him closer to the queen, and with her, the uncertainty of his fate. When he entered the grand hall, the atmosphere was tense. The queen sat on her throne, her face pale but composed, her eyes fixed on him. The princess was nearby, seated on a smaller chair, weak but alert, her gaze never leaving Aaron. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the unspoken words of the palace's many witnesses. The guards released Aaron from the chains, the metal clinking as they fell to the floor. For the first time in days, he was free, though he still felt the weight of fear pressing on him. The queen's voice broke the silence. "You saved her," she said slowly, as if tasting the words carefully. "All this time, we thought you had harmed her." Her eyes searched his face, looking for anger, deceit, or any sign that she had been right. But there was only calmness, dignity, and a quiet strength in Aaron's gaze. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with care. "I only reached out to help, Your Majesty. That is all I have ever done." The princess spoke next, her voice soft but firm. "He saved me. I know it, and I cannot let him suffer for something he did not do." Her eyes, though tired, shone with gratitude and honesty. The queen listened, her emotions swirling. Fear, guilt, relief, and admiration all mingled together. She had acted in anger to protect her daughter, yet now she realized that in her haste she had punished an innocent man. The weight of her mistake pressed on her, heavier than any crown she could wear. The doctors stepped forward, explaining carefully what had occurred. They described the princess's condition, how the touch had unexpectedly triggered a positive response in her body, and how Aaron's actions had helped her survive. Each word added to the truth that was becoming undeniable. Even the most skeptical courtiers and guards had to listen, and slowly the room's tension began to shift. The story of guilt turned into a story of courage and kindness. The queen took a deep breath, struggling to control the mix of emotions inside her. "We were wrong," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with remorse. "You were wronged, and it is my responsibility to correct it." She motioned to the guards. "Let him go. Let him walk free. No one will punish him further. And let him know that his courage and kindness are honored here." Aaron felt a wave of relief wash over him. His legs, stiff from days in chains, seemed lighter, and his heart, heavy with fear for so long, began to breathe again. He bowed deeply, not out of fear, but out of respect for the princess and the queen who had recognized the truth. He felt a quiet sense of vindication, though he knew the memory of his suffering would remain with him for a long time. The princess reached out her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I could not have survived without you." Aaron took her hand gently, not to assert anything, but to acknowledge the trust and gratitude between them. It was a small, quiet moment, but it spoke louder than any words could. The palace, which had once been filled with judgment and fear, now seemed to hold a breath of relief, as if it, too, recognized the importance of truth and justice. The queen's gaze softened. "I have learned something important," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "Fear can cloud our judgment. We must remember to seek truth before acting. No one should suffer without reason. Today, we have learned that lesson, though it has come at a heavy cost." Her words were heavy with emotion, not just for Aaron, but for herself, for the princess, and for all who had witnessed the events. Aaron, now free from chains, felt the weight of the hall's attention upon him. But instead of fear, he felt a quiet dignity. He had acted without selfish thought, without fear of consequences, and had saved a life. That alone gave him strength. He knew that the palace would remember this day, not for the punishment he endured, but for the courage and kindness he had shown. Even as he left the hall, his mind lingered on the lessons learned. He realized that life could be cruel, that fear could make even the powerful blind, and that truth could sometimes take too long to arrive. Yet, he also understood that courage and kindness could change hearts and lives in ways no one might expect. His act, small and simple, had shifted the course of events for an entire palace, saving a life and teaching those who witnessed it a lesson they would never forget. The palace slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The princess began to regain her strength, supported by doctors and careful rest. The queen's anger, which had once seemed unshakable, softened into understanding and caution. Courtiers and guards learned that assumptions could be dangerous, and that quick judgment could harm the innocent. And Aaron, though still a quiet man who had never sought attention, was now known and respected. Though he had suffered, Aaron carried himself with quiet pride. He did not boast or demand recognition. He understood that true courage was measured not by accolades, but by the choices one makes when no one is watching, when the world is unaware, and when fear threatens to paralyze action. His release was more than freedom from chains. It was freedom to continue living with dignity, and the quiet knowledge that he had done the right thing when it mattered most. The princess and Aaron shared a bond that could not be erased. It was not one of titles, power, or wealth, but of life, courage, and gratitude. The queen, too, learned to see the value of understanding, patience, and careful judgment. In the palace, a small but powerful transformation had occurred, a reminder that fear could blind. But truth, courage, and kindness could illuminate even the darkest places. The palace was quieter now, though the echoes of the past days still lingered in its corridors. The crowd that had gathered for celebrations and gatherings now seemed more cautious, as if they had learned to respect the weight of truth. The story of Aaron, the man who had been punished unjustly for a simple act of kindness, it spread throughout the palace and beyond. Servants whispered about his courage. Guards who had once treated him harshly now regarded him with respect, though some were still embarrassed by their previous actions. Aaron walked through the palace halls for the first time without chains around his wrists. The cold metal that had bound him for days now rested on the stone floor, clinking softly as the guards removed it. He could feel the weight of the walls and the grandeur around him, but he no longer felt trapped. Instead, a sense of quiet dignity filled him. Every step he took reminded him of the ordeal he had endured, but also of the truth he had upheld, the courage he had shown, and the life he had saved. The queen had called a private meeting in her chambers. She wanted to speak to Aaron directly, to apologize for the suffering she had caused, and to acknowledge his bravery. When he entered, she rose slowly from her throne. Her eyes, usually stern and commanding, now held a softness born of guilt and respect. "Aaron," she said quietly, "I have learned a lesson that I will never forget. I acted in anger and fear, and in doing so, I punished someone who had done nothing wrong. For this, I am truly sorry." Aaron nodded respectfully, his voice calm and measured. "Your Majesty, I hold no anger. I only acted as any person would to prevent harm. It was never my intention to bring trouble upon myself or anyone else." His humility impressed even the queen, who had expected a stronger demand for apology or recognition. The grace with which he spoke seemed to deepen her respect and regret. The princess, though still regaining her full strength, joined them. She smiled weakly, but genuinely at Aaron. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I cannot thank you enough. I wish I had spoken sooner, but I was afraid. Please know that your actions meant everything to me." Aaron bowed his head, touched by the sincerity in her voice. He could see the gratitude in her eyes, and it was more valuable than any reward or praise he could receive. The palace began to shift in subtle ways. The courtiers, the guards, and even the servants who had once feared Aaron now treated him differently. Whispers of admiration replaced those of suspicion. The story of his courage and selflessness became a quiet lesson in the palace halls. That quick judgment could harm the innocent, and that true character was revealed in moments of action, not in titles or appearances. Despite the change around him, Aaron remained humble. He did not ask for riches, honors, or a permanent place in the royal court. He simply requested that his dignity be restored and that the chains that had bound him be forgotten. He wished to continue his life quietly as he had before. But now, with the knowledge that truth and courage could protect the innocent, the queen, having witnessed the effects of fear and misunderstanding, made new decisions for the safety and justice within the palace. She ordered that no one be punished without investigation, and that the actions of each person be carefully understood before judgment. Her anger had taught her a powerful lesson, that fear, while natural, must never replace reason and understanding. She vowed to remember this day for the rest of her life, as a reminder that even the powerful must act with care. For the princess, the experience left a deep impression. She had come face to face with her own fear and confusion, and she had learned the value of honesty, courage, and speaking the truth, even when it was difficult. The bond between her and Aaron was quiet but strong, built on life, gratitude, and shared understanding. She knew that she owed him more than she could ever express in words, and that his bravery had changed the course of her life forever, as days turned into weeks. Aaron returned to his simple routines, but with a new sense of respect and quiet authority within the palace. He continued his work with diligence and care, but he no longer hid in the shadows. People now noticed him, not as a criminal or a servant to be overlooked, but as a man of courage who had acted rightly when it mattered most. His humility and bravery became known not through grand gestures, but through the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. The palace itself seemed transformed. The walls that had witnessed fear, anger, and misunderstanding now echoed with lessons of truth, kindness, and courage. Servants spoke more carefully. Guards observed their duties with thoughtfulness. Courtiers remembered that appearances could be deceiving. The story of Aaron became a gentle, enduring reminder that fear should never blind judgment, and that even the simplest act of courage could have profound effects. The queen occasionally visited him, sometimes with the princess, sometimes alone. Their conversations were respectful, calm, and sincere. She expressed her continued gratitude and remorse, while Aaron reminded her that forgiveness was as important as justice. Slowly, the palace began to feel less tense, more open, and more understanding. People started to see that kindness, courage, truth were qualities to be honored, no matter a person's rank or position. Aaron's life was not without its memories of suffering. The days in chains and the fear he had endured remained with him, a shadow that would not disappear entirely. Yet he carried it lightly, with wisdom and patience, knowing that he had acted rightly. His story, shared quietly among the palace inhabitants, inspired a sense of fairness, compassion, and courage that had been rare before. It reminded everyone that truth could prevail, even in the darkest moments, and that fear could be replaced by understanding if one had patience and faith. The princess, now fully recovered, often paused to think of him. In her heart, there was gratitude that went beyond words. She knew that his courage had saved her life, and that his integrity had changed her understanding of right and wrong. The bond they shared was quiet but enduring, a reminder that sometimes those who act without thought for themselves leave the greatest marks on the lives of others. In the end, Aaron returned to a life of simplicity, but with a new awareness of his own strength and value. He had faced fear, injustice, and misunderstanding, yet he had remained true to himself. The palace had learned lessons it would not forget, and the princess had learned the value of honesty, courage, and recognition of true character. The story of that man, who had been chained for an act of kindness, ended not in punishment, but in quiet honor, respect, and freedom. The palace became a place where fear and misunderstanding were tempered by patience and truth, where courage could be recognized, and where kindness, even in its smallest forms, could change lives forever. And though the palace returned to its routines, the memory of what had happened, and the lessons learned from it, remained. Aaron walked freely among the halls, not as a servant who had been punished unjustly, but as a quiet hero whose courage had saved a life, taught a queen humility, and reminded all who witnessed his story that truth and kindness could triumph over fear, even in the darkest times.